Professor Zethkara moved her crystalline limbs across the holographic display. The light bounced off her transparent body and painted rainbow colors on the classroom walls. Her voice buzzed through the translation device attached to her neck. "Today we will study the hunting patterns of apex predators from different worlds," she announced to her mixed class of students. The Galactic Educational Institute on Station Kepler 7 was famous for bringing together young minds from across the galaxy. Students from 12 different species sat in curved rows, each in specially designed seats that fit their unique body shapes. In the front row, a small group of Zephyrians shifted their chameleon-like skin to match their seats. Their large eyes darted around nervously as they always did when the topic of predators came up. Behind them, 3 Vorthak students hummed in harmony, their crystal bodies creating a soft musical sound. The massive Corvin twins took up an entire row by themselves, their thick fur rustling as they took notes with hands the size of dinner plates. At the very back of the classroom sat Marcus Chen, the only human in the advanced xenobiology program. He was smaller than most of his classmates, with dark hair and curious brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His datapad was filled with detailed notes and sketches of his fellow students. While others focused on Professor Zethkara's lecture, Marcus often found himself studying the behavior patterns of the different species in class. The Skarn Empire produces some of the most efficient killers in known space, Professor Zethkara continued. Images of reptilian creatures with razor-sharp claws appeared on the display. Their natural hunting instincts have been enhanced through genetic modification and combat training. A single Skarn warrior can take down prey 10 times their size. A young Altarian student raised one of her forearms. "Professor, what makes them so dangerous compared to other predator species?" "Excellent question, Lysa," the professor replied. "The Skarn combine natural stealth with advanced technology. They move silently, strike quickly, and show no mercy to their targets. They are the perfect ambush predators." Marcus tilted his head slightly and made a note on his datapad. Something about that description seemed familiar, though he could not quite place it. Suddenly, bright red lights began flashing throughout the classroom. A harsh alarm sound filled the air, and the station's AI announced in multiple languages, "Emergency lockdown initiated. All students and faculty remain in secure locations. Do not attempt to move through corridors. This is not a drill." The effect on the class was immediate and dramatic. The Zephyrians' skin turned pure white with fear, and they huddled together in the center of the room. The Vorthak students' musical humming became a high-pitched whine of panic. Even the massive Corvin twins pressed themselves against the wall, their fur standing on end. Professor Zethkara's crystalline form dimmed as she activated the classroom's emergency protocols. Blast shutters began to lower over the windows, but through the transparent aluminum walls, they could still see into the corridor beyond. That was when they saw him. Krex the Render moved through the hallway like a shadow given form. He was a Skarn warrior, exactly like the ones Professor Zethkara had just been describing. His dark scales seemed to absorb light, making him blend with the shadows between the corridor lights. In his clawed hands, he carried plasma weapons that hummed with deadly energy. His reptilian head turned slowly from side to side as he searched for something or someone. The class had gone completely silent, except for the soft whimpering of the more prey-oriented species. Everyone knew who Krex was. His image had been on wanted posters throughout the galaxy for months. He was a professional assassin who had killed politicians, business leaders, and anyone else who could pay his price. The news feeds called him one of the most dangerous beings alive. As Krex passed by their classroom, his yellow eyes swept across the transparent wall. Several students ducked down behind their desks. Others activated personal energy shields that flickered around their bodies like soap bubbles. The Zephyrians had turned completely invisible, though their panicked breathing could still be heard. In the midst of all this terror, a sound cut through the silence that made everyone freeze. It was laughter. Not hysterical, frightened laughter, but a soft, almost amused chuckle. Every head turned toward the back of the classroom where Marcus Chen sat calmly in his seat. The human had not ducked down or activated any shields. Instead, he was looking at Krex with the same expression he usually had when studying an interesting specimen. His datapad was out, and he appeared to be taking notes. "Chen," hissed Lisa the Altarian, "what are you doing?" Marcus looked up from his datapad with a slightly confused expression. "Taking observations. This is fascinating." "Fascinating?" squeaked one of the Zephyrians, momentarily becoming visible again. That's Krex the Render. He's killed hundreds of beings. I know who he is, Marcus replied calmly. That's what makes this so interesting. Professor Zethkara stared at her human student with a mixture of confusion and concern. Mr. Chen, perhaps you do not understand the danger we are in. That creature out there is one of the most efficient killers in the galaxy. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Yes, he's very impressive. Look at how he moves. He turned his datapad so others could see his notes. Perfect ambush predator behavior. Silent movement, efficient energy conservation. Systematic territory patrol. Textbook Skarn hunting pattern. How can you be so calm? Demanded one of the Corvin twins, his massive frame trembling. Marcus considered the question seriously. Because I recognize the behavior pattern. It's almost exactly like what we just learned about in class. He made another note. Though there are some interesting variations. See how he pauses at each doorway? That's not standard Skarn behavior. He's adapted his natural hunting instincts for an enclosed environment. The class stared at him in disbelief, while everyone else saw certain death walking the corridors. Marcus saw a learning opportunity. Mr. Chen, Professor Zethkara said carefully, I think perhaps your species' understanding of danger is different from ours. Probably, Marcus agreed. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a death world. We don't really have the same fear responses as species that evolved as prey. He looked back at Krex, who had moved further down the corridor but was still visible. Besides, he's actually not that scary when you understand his behavior patterns. Ambush predators like the Skarn are very predictable once you know what to look for. This statement caused another wave of shocked murmurs from the class. The idea that someone could find Krex the Render predictable seemed impossible. Predictable how? Professor Zethkara found herself asking, despite the situation. Marcus pulled up a diagram on his datapad. Well, look at his movement pattern. He's clearing rooms systematically, left to right, checking corners and blind spots. Very thorough, but also very routine. He's following his training, which means his next moves are easy to anticipate. He made a few more notes, then looked up at his terrified classmates. Actually, this is probably the safest classroom on the station right now. Safe? Several voices asked at once. Sure, Marcus said with a slight smile. He already checked this corridor. Ambush predators like to avoid areas they've already cleared unless they have a specific target. And if his target was in this classroom, he would have found it already. As if to prove Marcus's point, Krex could be seen moving away from their area, heading toward the station's central hub. The human leaned back in his chair and continued making notes. This is really good field research. I might be able to use this data for my thesis on predator behavior patterns. Professor Zethkara realized that while her other students were paralyzed by fear, her human student was treating this deadly situation like an academic exercise. It was both impressive and deeply unsettling. The emergency lights continued to flash, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of plasma weapons firing. But in Classroom 7 Delta, Marcus Chen continued taking notes while his classmates wondered if humans might be more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The emergency lockdown had been active for 30 minutes now. Throughout Station Kepler 7, students and faculty huddled in classrooms and offices waiting for the all-clear signal that had not come. The station's security forces were somewhere in the maze of corridors, hunting for Krex the Render. But so far they had found only empty rooms and the occasional scorch mark on the walls. In Classroom 7 Delta, the situation had settled into an uncomfortable routine. Most of the alien students remained pressed against the walls or hidden behind desks, their natural prey instincts keeping them as far as possible from the transparent aluminum windows. The Zephyrians had stopped turning invisible but kept their skin a pale, frightened color. The Vorthak students' crystalline bodies remained dim, their usual musical humming replaced by worried whispers. Even the massive Corvin twins stayed perfectly still, their fur flat against their bodies. But Marcus Chen continued to move around the classroom as if nothing unusual was happening. The human had positioned himself near the window wall where he could observe the corridors. His datapad was now connected to the classroom's main display, and he had filled several screens with notes, diagrams, and what looked like tactical assessments. Every few minutes, he would spot Krex moving through a distant corridor and add more observations to his growing collection of data. He's been checking the same areas multiple times, Marcus muttered to himself as he updated a movement map. That's not efficient hunting behavior. Either he's lost his target, or he's trying to drive them toward a specific location. Professor Zethkara had been watching her human student with growing fascination. Despite her own fear, she found his analytical approach to the situation strangely comforting. Mr. Chen, can you explain what you mean by efficient hunting behavior? Marcus looked up from his notes, apparently pleased to have someone to discuss his observations with. Well, most predators fall into categories based on how they hunt. Krex is clearly an ambush predator, but he's also showing pack hunting behaviors, which is unusual for Skarn. He pointed to a diagram on the display. See, typical ambush predators find a good hiding spot and wait for prey to come to them. But Krex is actively patrolling territory and using systematic search patterns. That's more like what you'd see from a pack hunter who's separated from their group. Lysa the Altarian raised one of her forearms tentatively. What's the difference? Ambush predators are patient, Marcus explained. They wait for the right moment and then strike quickly. Pack hunters are more active. They work together to corner prey and force them into bad positions. He made another note. Krex is trying to do both, which means he's not operating at full efficiency. One of the Zephyrian students flickered back into visibility, curiosity overcoming fear. How can you tell all that just by watching him walk around? Marcus smiled and pulled up a video clip he had recorded. Body language, movement patterns, timing. Look at how he moves. He slowed down the footage. See how he pauses at each intersection? He's not just checking for danger. He's listening and scenting the air, trying to track something specific. But how do you know so much about predator behavior? Asked one of the Corvin twins. The question seemed to catch Marcus off guard for a moment. I guess because humans are predators too, he said simply. We evolved as persistence hunters. We would chase prey for hours or days until they collapsed from exhaustion. Most of what Krex is doing looks familiar to me. This statement caused another wave of uncomfortable shifting from his classmates. The idea that their small, seemingly harmless human colleague was also a predator had not occurred to most of them. Professor Zethkara's crystalline form brightened slightly as her academic curiosity overcame her fear. Are you saying that humans recognize Krex's behavior because you share similar hunting instincts? Sort of, Marcus said thoughtfully. But humans also evolved as prey for some very dangerous predators. We had to learn to understand how different types of hunters worked, or we wouldn't have survived. He pulled up another diagram. That's why I can spot the weaknesses in Krex's approach. Weaknesses? Several voices asked at once. Marcus nodded and pointed to his movement map. He's following a predictable pattern. Right now he's clearing the upper levels first, then moving down. But he's also staying in the main corridors. He hasn't checked the maintenance tunnels, the cargo areas, or the emergency passages. Maybe those areas are too small for him, suggested Lysa. Exactly, Marcus said with enthusiasm. Krex is built for open combat. Big muscles, heavy weapons, intimidating presence. But that makes him less effective in confined spaces. Any prey that can fit in the smaller passages has a huge advantage. As if summoned by their conversation, Krex appeared in the corridor outside their classroom again. This time he moved more slowly, and Marcus could see that the assassin looked frustrated. His reptilian head swiveled from side to side more frequently, and his grip on his weapons had tightened. He's getting angry, Marcus observed, making more notes. That's good for us, but bad for anyone he does find. Frustrated predators make mistakes, but they also become more violent. The alien students watched in amazement as Marcus continued to analyze Krex like a specimen in a laboratory. The human seemed completely unaware that most beings would be terrified in this situation. Mr. Chen, Professor Zethkara said carefully, are you not afraid? Marcus considered the question seriously. Not really. I mean, I understand that Krex is dangerous, but fear isn't very useful right now. It's better to gather information and plan responses. He gestured to his classmates who were still huddled in defensive positions. Look at how everyone is reacting. Classic prey responses. Hiding, freezing, clustering together for protection. Those are good strategies if you're being hunted by something that relies on movement detection, or if you're trying to confuse a predator about which target to choose. And what would a predator do in this situation? Asked one of the Zephyrians. Depends on the type of predator, Marcus replied. An ambush predator would find the best hiding spot and wait for an opportunity. A pack hunter would try to coordinate with allies and set up a trap. A persistence hunter would start gathering information about the target's weaknesses and movement patterns. He held up his data pad with its detailed notes and maps. Guess which approach I'm taking? Professor Zethkara felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear. "You're hunting the hunter." "Information hunting," Marcus corrected. "I'm not planning to fight Krex, that would be stupid. But if I understand his behavior well enough, I might be able to predict what he'll do next or find ways to avoid him." Another alarm sounded through the station, different from the lockdown alert. The station's AI announced, "Security breach in Section C. All personnel in adjacent areas proceed to emergency shelters immediately." Marcus quickly cross-referenced the announcement with his movement map. "Section C is 3 levels down and 2 sectors over. Krex found something." The sounds of plasma weapons firing could be heard through the station structure, followed by what sounded like an explosion. Several of the alien students whimpered and pressed themselves closer to the walls, but Marcus leaned forward with interest. "That's not normal hunting behavior. Skarn prefer quick, quiet kills. If Krex is using heavy weapons and causing explosions, it means his target is fighting back effectively." "Is that good or bad?" asked Lisa. "Good for us," Marcus said, updating his notes. "It means Krex has found what he was looking for, so he's less likely to keep searching other areas. Bad for whoever he's fighting." The sounds of battle continued for several more minutes before falling silent. The emergency lights continued to flash, but no more announcements came from the station's AI. Marcus made a few final notes and then looked up at his classmates. "I think the immediate danger is past. Krex either completed his mission or was stopped by security. Either way, he won't be randomly hunting through classrooms anymore." Professor Zethkara stared at her human student with a mixture of admiration and concern. In 30 minutes, Marcus had transformed from a curious biology student into something resembling a tactical analyst. The casual way he discussed hunting strategies and predator behavior was both impressive and deeply unsettling. "Mr. Chen," she said finally, "I think I am beginning to understand why humans are classified as a Deathworlder species." Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by this statement. "Really? I just applied basic behavioral analysis. Any good xenobiologist should be able to do the same thing." But as Professor Zethkara looked around at her other students, who were still trembling from fear despite Marcus's reassurances, she realized that not every species approached danger with such clinical detachment. Perhaps humans really were different in ways that even they did not fully understand. The battle sounds from Section C had ended 20 minutes ago, but the emergency lockdown remained in effect. Marcus Chen had spent the time refining his behavioral analysis of Krex the Render, creating detailed maps of the assassin's movement patterns and tactical preferences. His alien classmates remained huddled in defensive positions, but they had begun to watch the human with growing fascination. Professor Zethkara's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. "Mr. Chen, the security forces should have given us an update by now. The silence is troubling." Marcus looked up from his datapad, where he had been calculating probability matrices for different scenario outcomes. "The silence actually tells us quite a bit. If security had captured Krex, they would have announced it immediately to calm the civilian population. If Krex had completed his mission and escaped, he would have triggered the emergency evacuation protocols to cover his exit." "So what does the continued silence mean?" asked Lysa the Altarian. "Either the situation is ongoing or something unexpected happened," Marcus replied. He stood up and moved to the window wall, scanning the corridors with practiced efficiency. "I haven't seen any security patrols in the past 15 minutes. That's not normal for an active hunt." As if responding to his observation, a new sound echoed through the station's corridors. It was different from the earlier weapon fire EWOs, more rhythmic and deliberate. Marcus tilted his head, listening carefully. "He's back," Marcus said quietly. "What?" Several voices spoke at once. "Krex. That's the sound of systematic room clearing. He's moving this way." The effect on the alien students was immediate. The Zephyrians disappeared completely, their natural camouflage activated by pure terror. The Vorthak students' crystalline bodies went completely dark. Even the massive Corvin twins pressed themselves flat against the floor, trying to make their enormous forms as small as possible. But Marcus remained standing by the window, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, checking his notes. "If he completed his mission in Section C, why is he still hunting? And why come back to areas he already cleared?" Professor Zethkara's voice was barely a whisper. "Perhaps his first target was not his only target." Marcus nodded slowly. "Or his first target got away and he's tracking them." He pulled up his movement maps and cross-referenced them with the station's layout. If someone escaped from Section C, the most logical route would take them through this sector. The rhythmic sounds were getting closer. Through the transparent aluminum walls, they could see lights moving in the distant corridors. Cursed the glow of Krex's weapons as he approached. "We need to find a way out of here," whispered one of the Corvin twins. Marcus was already studying the classroom schematics on his datapad. The main exits lead directly into his patrol route. But there's a maintenance access panel behind Professor Zethkara's desk that connects to the service tunnels. Those tunnels are too small for most species, Professor Zethkara pointed out. Too small for most species, Marcus agreed, but not for humans. The implications of this statement hit the class like a physical blow. The small human was volunteering to leave the safety of the classroom and venture into the station's service areas, while a professional assassin hunted nearby. "Mr. Chen," Professor Zethkara said urgently, "you cannot seriously be considering leaving this room." Marcus was already pulling up detailed schematics of the service tunnel network. "Actually, it makes perfect sense. Krex is adapted for hunting in open spaces against targets that think like prey. But I'm a persistence predator from a death world. I understand how he thinks, and I can move through spaces he can't access." "But what could you possibly accomplish?" asked Lysa. "Information gathering," Marcus replied as if it were obvious. "I can track his actual position, confirm his movement patterns, and maybe figure out what he's really after. Right now we're operating on assumptions, but I could gather real data." "That's not information gathering," squeaked one of the Zephyrians, flickering back into visibility. "That's stalking a predator." Marcus paused in his preparations and looked at his classmates with genuine confusion. "Isn't that the same thing?" The alien students exchanged glances. Once again, their human colleague had said something that sounded perfectly reasonable to him but terrifying to everyone else. Professor Zethkara made a decision that went against every instinct her crystalline species had developed over millions of years of evolution. "If you are determined to do this, Mr. Chen, at least explain your reasoning. How is this not simply suicide?" Marcus activated the maintenance panel and began examining the tunnel entrance. It was indeed small, barely large enough for his compact human frame to crawl through comfortably. "Because I understand the tactical situation better than Krex does." He's thinking like a Skarn warrior. Direct confrontation, overwhelming force, intimidation. But this environment doesn't favor that approach. He pulled up a three-dimensional map of the tunnel network. These service passages connect every major section of the station. They were designed for maintenance drones, but they're perfect for a persistence predator who knows how to use confined spaces. "I can move faster through here than Krex can through the main corridors, and I can access areas he doesn't even know exist." "But he has weapons," protested one of the Corvin twins. "Weapons designed for open combat," Marcus corrected. "Plasma rifles and energy cannons are useless in a tunnel barely wider than my shoulders. If anything, his weapons are a disadvantage in this environment." Marcus began checking his equipment. Datapad, emergency rations, portable light source, and the standard emergency beacon all students carried. "Besides, I'm not planning to fight him. I'm planning to observe him." "There's a difference." "The difference being?" Professor Zethkara asked. "A fight implies two predators competing for the same resource," Marcus explained as he prepared to enter the tunnel. "But I don't want what Krex wants. I just want to understand his behavior patterns well enough to predict his actions." "That's not competition, that's research." The sounds of systematic searching were now very close. Through the window they could see the glow of weapon lights in the adjacent corridor. "He'll be here in minutes," whispered Lisa. Marcus nodded and activated his portable light, which gives me a perfect opportunity to see how he reacts to finding an empty classroom after expecting to find hiding prey. He paused at the entrance to the maintenance tunnel and looked back at his classmates. "Keep the blast shutters sealed and don't make any sounds. If I'm right about his behavior patterns, he'll do a quick scan of this room and then move on. If I'm wrong, what if you're wrong?" Professor Zethkara asked. Marcus shrugged. "Then I'll learn something new about Skarn psychology, assuming I survive long enough to record the data." With that cheerfully disturbing statement, the human disappeared into the maintenance tunnel, his light fading as he crawled deeper into the station's service areas. The alien students stared at the tunnel entrance in stunned silence. In the space of a few hours, their quiet, studious human classmate had transformed into something that seemed both impressive and terrifying. He was voluntarily hunting one of the most dangerous assassins in the galaxy, and he was treating it like a field research project. "Professor," whispered one of the Zephyrians, "are all humans like this?" Professor Zethkara's crystalline form pulsed with confused light patterns. "I truly do not know. Until today, I thought Mr. Chen was simply an enthusiastic xenobiology student." The rhythmic sounds of Krex's approach grew louder. Soon they would discover whether Marcus Chen's understanding of predator behavior was as accurate as he claimed, or whether they had just watched their human classmate crawl to his death in pursuit of scientific knowledge. But even as fear settled over the classroom like a blanket, Professor Zethkara found herself hoping that Marcus was right about Scarn psychology. Because if the humans survived this insane experiment, the data he gathered would revolutionize their understanding of both predator behavior and the strange species called humanity. The footsteps stopped directly outside their classroom door. Marcus. Chen had been crawling through the maintenance tunnels for 12 minutes when he discovered that his theoretical understanding of persistence hunting was about to be tested in the most practical way possible. The service passages were exactly as cramped as he had expected, but they offered something invaluable. They were a complete view of Krex the Render's actual hunting behavior. Through the tunnel's sensor grates, Marcus had watched the Scarn assassin clear Classroom 7 Delta with mechanical precision. Just as predicted, Krex had scanned the room quickly, found no immediate targets, and moved on without conducting a thorough search. The alien students' prey behavior had actually worked in their favor, by remaining completely still and silent. They had convinced the predator that the room was empty. Now Marcus was tracking Krex through the tunnel network, staying roughly parallel to the assassin's position in the main corridors. His datapad was recording everything: movement patterns, timing intervals, weapon positioning, even the subtle changes in Krex's body language that indicated frustration or alertness. What Marcus discovered was both fascinating and troubling. Krex was not hunting randomly. The Scarn was following a specific scent trail, one that led through the station's central hub toward the emergency evacuation pods. Someone had escaped from Section C, and Krex was tracking them with the single-minded determination of a persistence predator. But that meant the hunt was far from over. Marcus paused at a junction in the tunnel system and consulted his datapad. According to the station schematics, the evacuation pod bay was 3 sections away. If Krex maintained his current pace, he would reach it in approximately 15 minutes. Whoever he was hunting would be trapped in a dead-end area with no escape routes. The human faced a decision that went against every logical survival instinct his species had developed. The smart thing to do was return to the classroom and wait for station security to handle the situation. But Marcus had spent the last hour studying Krex's behavior patterns, and he understood something that the security forces did not. Krex was no longer just hunting. He was frustrated hunting. And frustrated predators were dangerous to everyone, not just their intended targets. Marcus activated his emergency communicator and tried to contact station security. Static filled the channel. Either the security forces were maintaining communication silence, or something had happened to their communication network. That left Marcus with limited options, and all of them involved making decisions that would have seemed insane to his alien classmates. He began crawling faster through the tunnels, taking a more direct route toward the evacuation pod bay. If he could get there before Krex, he might be able to warn whoever was hiding there, or at least gather enough data to understand what the Scarn was really after. 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged from a maintenance shaft into a storage room adjacent to the evacuation pod bay. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he could see 3 figures huddled near the emergency pods. 2 humans in station security uniforms, and one being Marcus did not recognize a tall, thin creature with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. The humans appeared to be injured, while the alien was working frantically at one of the pod control panels. Marcus realized he was looking at the survivors of whatever had happened in Section C. But more importantly, he could hear the distinctive sound of Krex's approach through the main corridor. The assassin would reach the pod bay in less than 5 minutes, and the survivors had no idea they were about to be cornered. Marcus faced another impossible decision. He could try to warn the survivors through the wall, but that would alert Krex to his presence. He could retreat through the tunnels and hope that station security would eventually arrive. But the survivors would almost certainly be killed, or he could do something. That combined the worst aspects of both options. Marcus activated his emergency beacon on a frequency he knew his classmates would be monitoring. Then he began making noise. Not random noise of kuyao. Carefully planned noise designed to draw Krex's attention away from the pod bay and toward his position in the storage room. It was the kind of tactical decision that required understanding both predator psychology and prey behavior patterns. The response was immediate. Krex's footsteps changed direction, moving toward the storage room instead of the pod bay. Through the walls, Marcus could see the survivors freeze as they realized something was happening nearby. But Marcus had miscalculated one crucial factor: his alien classmates. Professor Zethkara's voice crackled through the emergency channel. "Mr. Chen, we have received your beacon signal. We are tracking your position." "Stay in the classroom," Marcus whispered into his communicator. "This is just an observation mission." "Negative," came an unexpected voice. Lysa the Altarian. "We monitored your conversation with the survivors through the emergency channel. We know you are attempting a rescue operation." Marcus blinked in surprise. "You were listening to emergency frequencies? You taught us to gather information," Professor Zethkara's voice replied. "We have been tracking both your position and Krex's position through the station's internal sensors. We know you are about to be cornered." The sounds of Krex's approach were getting closer. Marcus could hear the assassin's clawed feet clicking against the corridor floor as he zeroed in on the storage room. "This is not your problem," Marcus whispered urgently. "I can handle this." "No," said a new voice out, one of the Corvin twins. "You said earlier that pack hunters coordinate with allies to set up traps. We are your pack." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear. His casual discussions of hunting strategies had apparently had a more significant impact on his classmates than he had realized. "You don't understand," he tried to explain. "I'm not actually planning to fight Krex. I'm going to lead him on a chase through the tunnel system until security arrives. And we are going to help," Professor Zethkara announced with surprising firmness. "You have taught us to think like predators instead of prey. Now we will apply that knowledge." Before Marcus could protest further, the storage room's main door began to glow as Krex applied a plasma cutter to the lock mechanism. The human had perhaps 30 seconds before the Skarn warrior would have direct access to his position. "What are you planning?" Marcus asked desperately. "Distraction and misdirection," replied Lisa. "The same techniques you described for persistence hunting, but applied by multiple individuals working in coordination." Marcus heard the sound of the classroom door opening, followed by movement in the corridors. His alien classmates were actually leaving their safe positions to help him. The knowledge filled him with a mixture of admiration and horror. "This is not how prey species behave," Marcus muttered to himself. "We are not prey." Professor Zethkara's voice replied through the communicator. "You have taught us that we are learning predators. Now we will demonstrate what we have learned." The storage room door began to buckle under Krex's plasma cutter. Marcus gathered his equipment and prepared to retreat into the maintenance tunnels. But now, instead of being alone in his impossible situation, he had allies who understood tactical thinking. It was either the best possible outcome or the worst possible outcome, and Marcus would not know which until they were all either safe or dead. Through his communicator, he could hear his classmates moving through the corridors with surprising stealth. The Zephyrians were using their natural camouflage abilities for reconnaissance. The Vorthak students were using their crystalline bodies to create light reflections that confused visual tracking. Even the massive Corvin twins were finding ways to move quietly through the station's larger passages. They were not acting like prey anymore. They were acting like a coordinated hunting pack, with Marcus as their inadvertent pack leader. The storage room door finally gave way, and Krex the Render stepped into the chamber with weapons ready. But instead of finding a cornered human, he found an empty room with an open maintenance shaft and the sound of coordinated movement echoing through the station's corridors. For the first time since beginning his hunt, Krex encountered something that made him hesitate. He was no longer hunting a single target hiding in terror. He was facing organized opposition from multiple individuals working together, and that changed everything. The transformation of Classroom 7 Delta students from terrified prey into a coordinated hunting pack had taken exactly 43 minutes. Marcus Chen knew this because he had been tracking their progress through his datapad while simultaneously leading Krex the Render on an increasingly complex chase through Station Kepler 7's service areas. What had started as a simple observation mission had evolved into something that resembled a three-dimensional chess game played with real lives as stakes. But Marcus was beginning to realize that his alien classmates had learned his lessons about predator behavior far better than he had expected. Through his communicator, he could hear Professor Zethkara coordinating movements with tactical precision that would have impressed a military commander. Lysa maintained visual contact with the target from Corridor Junction 7. Corvin team, position yourselves at the intersection of sections B and C. Zephyrian scouts, continue monitoring all emergency exits, saw Professor. Marcus whispered into his device. You're starting to sound like a pack leader. I am a pack leader, Professor Zethkara replied with surprising confidence. You taught us that predators organize themselves hierarchically for maximum efficiency. I am simply applying your educational framework to our current situation. Marcus had to admit that the approach was working. For the past 20 minutes, Krex had been unable to complete his hunt because every time he got close to a target, another member of the pack would create a distraction elsewhere. The Skarn assassin was being forced to react to their coordinated movements instead of following his own tactical plan. But Marcus also understood something his classmates did not. Hoa. This strategy could only work for a limited time. Eventually, Krex would adapt his tactics or become frustrated enough to abandon subtlety in favor of overwhelming violence. We need to end this, Marcus announced through his communicator. Krex is starting to show signs of extreme agitation. If he goes into a full combat rage, he'll start destroying everything in sight until he finds his targets. What do you suggest? Asked Lysa. Marcus paused at a tunnel junction and consulted his comprehensive behavioral analysis of Krex's hunting patterns. Over the past hour, he had gathered more data on Skarn psychology than most xenobiologists collected in years of study. Now he needed to use that knowledge in the most practical way possible. I'm going to talk to him, Marcus announced. The response through his communicator was immediate and uniformly horrified. Mr. Chen, Professor Zethkara said urgently, that is not tactical thinking. That is suicide. Actually, it's applied xenopsychology, Marcus corrected. I've been studying Krex's behavior for over an hour now. I understand his tactical preferences, his frustration triggers, and his decision-making patterns. More importantly, I think I know what he actually wants. Marcus began crawling toward the main corridor system, heading for a location where he could confront Krex directly. Think about it logically. Krex is a professional assassin. He doesn't kill randomly au row. He kills for specific reasons. But his behavior today has been inconsistent with a standard assassination mission. How so? Asked one of the Corvin twins. He's been hunting for hours instead of making a quick strike, Marcus explained. He's used heavy weapons and caused explosions, which goes against Skarn's stealth doctrine. And most importantly, he's still here instead of escaping after completing his mission. Marcus emerged from a maintenance shaft into Corridor Section D, directly in Krex's projected path. Through his datapad, he could see that the Skarn assassin was less than 2 minutes away. Mr. Chen, Professor Zethkara's voice was tight with concern. Even if your analysis is correct, direct confrontation with Krex is extraordinarily dangerous. Not if I'm right about what he actually wants, Marcus replied. He positioned himself in the middle of the corridor, sitting cross-legged with his datapad open and his hands clearly visible. Everyone maintain your positions, but be ready to implement emergency evacuation protocol. If this goes wrong, the sound of Krex's approach echoed through the corridor, by the distinctive clicking of clawed feet on metal decking that Marcus had been studying for the past hour. When the Skarn assassin rounded the corner and saw the small human sitting calmly in his path, he stopped so abruptly that his momentum carried him forward another step. For several seconds, the two predators studied each other. Krex towered over Marcus, his dark scales gleaming under the corridor lights and his weapons humming with lethal energy. But instead of immediately attacking, the assassin tilted his reptilian head and made a sound that might have been confusion. Hello, Krex, Marcus said in a conversational tone. I've been studying your behavior patterns for the past hour. You're not actually here to kill anyone, are you? Krex's yellow eyes narrowed, but he did not raise his weapons. Explain. Your hunting behavior has been all wrong for an assassination mission, Marcus said, consulting his datapad. Too much noise, too much visible activity, Too many missed opportunities for clean kills. You're not trying to eliminate targets, Arao. You're trying to contain them. The Skarn assassin remained motionless, but Marcus could see subtle changes in his posture that indicated increased attention rather than aggression. Someone hired you to keep specific individuals on this station until they could arrive, to deal with them personally, Marcus continued. But those individuals have been trying to escape, so you've been forced to hunt them down and corner them. The problem is you're running out of time, and your employers are probably getting impatient. Krex made a low growling sound that might have been acknowledgement. Marcus gestured to his datapad, which displayed detailed maps of the station and movement patterns. Here's what I think happened. Your targets tried to escape through Section C, so you cornered them there, but they got away during the fighting, and now they're hiding in the evacuation pod bay. You've been trying to recapture them without killing them, which goes against your natural hunting instincts and makes the job much more difficult. Continue, Krex said, his voice a low rasp. The problem is that you're now trapped on a space station with limited escape routes, Marcus explained. Station security is closing in. Your targets are getting desperate, and a group of students has been interfering with your operation. Even if you complete your mission, you probably won't be able to escape. Marcus stood up slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. So here's what I propose. You surrender to station security now, and I'll testify that you were attempting to capture rather than kill your targets. That changes the charges from multiple murder attempts to kidnapping and assault. You'll get standard imprisonment instead of execution. Krex's grip on his weapons tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought he had miscalculated. But then the assassin spoke again. And if I refuse? Marcus pulled up another display on his datapad, a real-time map showing the positions of his classmates throughout the station. Then you face the reality that you're no longer the apex predator in this environment. You're surrounded by a coordinated pack of individuals who understand your behavioral patterns and can predict your movements. We can shut down life support in specific sections, control access to escape routes, and maintain this tactical situation indefinitely. To demonstrate his point, Marcus activated his communicator. Professor Zethkara, please demonstrate Pack Coordination Protocol 7. Throughout the station, corridor lights began shutting down in sequence, creating a pattern that systematically eliminated Krex's primary escape routes while leaving the evacuation pod bay brightly lit. As you can see, Marcus said calmly, we're not prey anymore. We're a problem-solving collective, and right now, you're the problem we're solving. Krex stared at the human for a long moment, then slowly lowered his weapons. Station security will arrive in approximately 8 minutes, Marcus continued. Your targets in the pod bay will be safely evacuated. Your employers will be disappointed, but you'll be alive to take other contracts. From a tactical standpoint, surrender is your most logical option. The great Skarn assassin looked around at the darkened corridors, then at the small human who had somehow turned a simple hunt into an exercise in applied xenopsychology. Finally, he placed his weapons on the floor and sat down heavily. Human, Krex said. Your species is more dangerous than we believed. Marcus made a final note on his datapad. We're not dangerous. We're curious. But apparently, in the right circumstances, that might be the same thing. When station security finally arrived, they found Marcus Chen sitting in the corridor with Krex the Render, discussing the finer points of persistence, hunting strategies, while a group of alien students monitored the situation from strategic positions throughout the station. Professor Zethkara later recommended Marcus's thesis on cooperative problem-solving in multi-species educational environments for immediate publication. The title, she noted, did not adequately describe what had actually happened, but some experiences were too complex for simple academic categorization. After all, how do you classify the moment when a class of prey species learns to think like predators and discovers that the most dangerous predator of all might be a species that treats mortal danger as an interesting research opportunity?